Hello, this is Gary Van Mormondem of the Awareness and Consciousness podcast. And today we've got Daniel Moore interviewing me, and I'm going to speak about consciousness and the mind, and hopefully we say something smart and helpful.
Okay, but next time you do it, you want to do it without the in there.
I messed up the Okay, I'll work on it for next time.
When
Keep
I
the
did,
out.
I would go edit it out in audio, but
You don't care anymore.
can't fix it. I do care. I obviously brought it up. Some part of me cares.
True.
Some part of me. That's the topic for today. Some part of me cares. Isn't that interesting? We say that a lot, right? Some part of me cares. Some part of me wants to do this. Some part of me is afraid. Part of me feels this. And so we always talk about parts of ourselves. And this is very typical in things like certain therapy programs talk about parts work. Because like that's not the totality of us that is afraid. Or a part of me wants to do this, but a part of me doesn't. The conflicts. And today I want to talk about that structure that's both parts and consciousness and emotional and memory, and how that puts us into a lot of tension and stress, internal conflict, internal narrative stories that can argue back and forth or debate back and forth or suppress each other, denial, things like that happen because parts of us are doing different things in conflict with each other. And what it is we've ended up at a certain point in our life looking around at what our mind is doing, what our emotions are doing, and we have a divided mind and we have a divided will. And by divided will and mind, I mean, like, well, we have good intentions to want to do something, but then we sabotage it. So our energy is going to the sabotage, and the behavior of the sabotage, we're not following through. But our good intentions want to go forward. So this is one of those, what's really going on here and why is this happening? Things I want to address, just to put it out on the table and say, this is how we got here, because I think can be kind of a relief if you have a model and you know why this is happening. You go, oh, okay, because just to see your mind do these things, well, for one, people will go, I'm crazy. If they have more awareness, they'll be aware of themselves as consciousness and go, oh, my mind is crazy. My mind is doing completely crazy things or opposing things or contradictory things. Doesn't make sense. And so there should be a model for this, or understanding of this, so we can look at that and go, well, of course it's doing that. It makes total sense that it's doing that. That's what a typical mind does. I won't say a healthy mind because we have to heal it, but it's what a typical mind does. And I can say for myself, when I really could see my mind and the things that I learned and was operating by, I saw it, I was like, that's crazy. But it's very different to say that from a point of view of consciousness, where you're like, oh, that's okay that my mind is crazy, versus how we typically think of, oh, watching our mind and feeling that we're inside of it, pulled in all these different directions and all the emotions, and feeling like we're crazy in the middle of the mind. So, and I when I work with clients and they really get to a point and it's like, my mind is crazy, I go, yes, they're progressing in kind of their awareness and consciousness journey to really be separate, really be observer, and can then really make changes in healing in it. So that's where I want to go.
Great. Our mind is crazy. We have different parts. It's been divided. And I think you'd have to explain that a little bit here.
Yeah.
And we're not our minds. And you say our mind is divided and our will is divided. So you see that as separate or intertwined?
Yes, they're separate. They're two different kinds of energy that happen in the formation, and our consciousness is divided into our mind. So let's talk about just these three different qualities: consciousness, our mind, and our will.
Okay.
And how they structure. So we'll talk about consciousness, and we talked about, like, what are we interview topic a couple interviews ago. Consciousness is this, let's think of it as a cloud. This cloud of awareness. And we can take that cloud of awareness and we can direct it to, say, what our feet are feeling. And that cloud of awareness is going, oh, these are the feet. I can perceive what the feet are feeling. I can put my awareness on my breath. And oh, now I notice what the breath is doing and how the breath feels. Okay. I can put my awareness, attention on what I'm hearing. And now it's our attention's in kind of the sense of listening, or our attention and therefore our consciousness is on maybe what we're seeing. And our consciousness, while on saying something we're listening to or seeing, we're not very aware of what our feet are feeling. We're not very aware of what our emotions are feeling. We're not very aware of maybe other people in the room. You know, we can be in a conversation with somebody in a busy room and just block everything else out. Right? Or we can be someplace trying to really listen to somebody, and the voices in our head are so loud, our attention's kind of occupied there. So there's a way to be aware of multiple things or singular things, depending on where we focus consciousness, wherever we put that cloud, okay, of awareness, consciousness.
So where attention is, that's what our consciousness experiences. And so, yeah, we could be at a coffee shop. We can hear other people talking. We can listen to our thoughts, read a book, hear the background music. That's what we experience.
Yeah. And very often our unconscious mind, say we're driving in a car, very typically, our unconscious mind has got this routine of automated driving skills down to such thing. We're often daydreaming in our mind, having a conversation on the phone or in our own head, an imaginary conversation about a meeting that's coming up, something that just happened. And we get to our destination and we're like, oh yeah, I don't remember driving here. So our unconscious is doing things automatically. Because we've done it so many times, our brain has offloaded that to these automatic routines. So our mind has this conscious awareness, things that we're perceiving and sensing or thinking, and then it has these automatic routines in the unconscious, which are things it's done habitually and can do automatically. So there's consciousness floating around, moving around. And then and if you think about just neural pathways in the brain, say driving, some of those neural pathways in the brain of where your feet move and how much you press the gas and the brake and stopping at stoplights, these are automated responses and the brain's firing, and we don't have to consciously make our foot do that. We've consciously made our foot do it enough time that the neural pathways in the brain automatically firing, and it's automated.
Yeah.
So as much as we say this is happening in the mind uh, and with consciousness, some things are unconscious, but there's a system of neural pathways and synapses firing in this whole thing.
Yeah. Like when we learned how to drive, we had to consciously be aware of it at the beginning. And then at a certain point, it kicked on to automatic, and our mind's just doing that
Yeah.
on its own.
And this is for anything we do automatically. Much of our thinking is automatic. Much of our speaking is automatic. Our walking, eating, typing. So playing an instrument, all those things are automatic. So most of what we're doing is automatic. All right. So now there's another energy that's related to will, and it's how we use our will that eventually divides and becomes a divided will. And this has to do with the power of, and I'm going to use kind of will and faith simultaneously together. I mean, they're both our personal power. And we can say it's made up because we can't measure it, but there's a lot of things we can't measure. We can't measure gravity directly, right? So, but we're pretty sure it all exists. We see the impact and effects of it. So will, faith, these are the power of our conviction, our motivation, our drive. This is kind of the internal energy that moves through us, that maybe we notice it when we get really angry. We're like, ah, and we're driven to do something and throw things and break things. Okay, we feel all that energy coming through that then forms an action. But we can also have that will be expressed as a passion, a certainty, conviction, that we then defend our ideas. So we can take our faith, a certainty of conviction, and we can put it into an idea, something being right, something being wrong, then creating this feeling of injustice. So I am this way, I'm not this way. So there's these internal energy that can drive us internally, and that will, faith, conviction can go into an idea. Okay. You see people passionate about their politics, they're passionate about their relationship, who wronged them, being right. You can go into an idea. So there's that internal energy that infuses an idea and makes that idea powerful and alive. Right?
That's that. Let's say somebody really insists on their opinion or point of view, and they're putting a lot of will into it, or somebody says like, "F that guy," and there's like,
There's
that
certain
guy's an ass, and you can feel the energy with it. That will.
they are absolutely certain, and you try and change their mind, their opinion is not going to change because it's backed by this power that holds it in place, right? And then there's other ideas we're like, yeah, maybe that's true, maybe it's not true. Oh, you got some evidence? Oh, okay. Yeah, all right, I'll look at it that way. Right? It's not held rigidly, meaning there's not power holding it in place. Okay. And this is a thing and it happens to us over time. We make out those. I think it's a lot of the values lost on it. He used to talk a lot about opinions and just the absolute waste of energy with it. The more opinions we acquire, the more rigid becomes all of those points of conviction, to where we have very, very little flexibility in thought. It's like all of our thinking's automatic thinking then. It's all reactive based on these rigid structures that hardly move, that we've put in place. So there's, depending on how rigidly you attached, how much energy you've put into that opinion, or you put very small, then it's easy to move. Right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think just like we've seen that where you have like an opinion, I think everybody must have had that experience if they have some self-awareness of it, where somebody tells them something and their mind already prepares an answer, not really listening even to the other person's case, because the mind is so convinced of its case that it just is preparing to blurt it out. At least probably everybody did it, and that probably everybody experienced it.
Most of listening, and for a lot of people I observe, is that they're just waiting for a chance to give their case, and they're trying to hold back their mind, and a lot of times they just interrupt before a person finishes anyway. So, but that's so. I mean, you watch the news in the States these days, or it's like the news shows demonstrate that.
Everybody's yelling at each
It's
other.
it's the example of how people have conversations. It's a terrible example. It's not a conversation. Nobody's listening. Which goes to the term metote Miguel introduces in the book The Four Agreements. Metote is a cacophony of voices, like a marketplace. Everybody's talking and no one's listening. So, and that's a lot of times the chatter in our mind is metote. It represents that. So the other element is to how do you start to come together? Our consciousness, will, and the mind, and fixed points come together, is as we're growing up, domestication. We have experiences in our life, and the experiences in life that are the most formative are the emotional ones, traumatic ones, nervous system regulating or dysregulating ones. Those that have the strongest feeling to them. And let's say we were bullied. Okay. We go to school, we're bullied. That in our brain, depending on how much support we feel we have or don't have, how alone we feel, our brain or our body might perceive that as life-threatening. Okay. um, when we fall in love, our heart opens up. I mean, that blasts so many neural pathways in our brain and our nervous system. Okay. Or the inevitable heartbreak. That's very painful and blasts a lot of emotional energy with that. Those are emotional experiences. And if we just had those and we didn't remember, we'd go off and live in the moment. But we have the ability to remember. And we have the ability to tell a story about those emotional experiences. And when we tell a story or we remember something, those are two different things. Okay. If I sit here and I remember being bullied, I remember being made fun of, I remember a broken heart or fall in love, I just experience it again. And this is one of the interesting things about consciousness. Take a moment to remember, go to a memory. You can just remember what food you ate earlier today or today.
I got a memory.
Okay. You can remember being in love.
Yeah.
You can remember when it first happened. You can remember a heartbreak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you go back to that, what kinds of things do you remember? Did you see something?
Yeah, I see, I feel.
See, you feel emotionally?
Yeah.
Feel it in your body physically?
Emotionally.
Yeah. Do you hear, maybe there's a song soundtrack that goes with it or certain words in conversations that happened?
Yeah, there could be colors to it.
Yeah. Okay. So you go back to a memory and the neural pathways. So what happens when we review a memory? Our consciousness is traveling to this cluster, that's how I think about it, cluster of neural pathways firing in the brain. And they're firing again as similar to where they did when it happened. They're refiring, they're playing visual components, auditory components, emotional
Yeah.
components. These are all different parts of the brain that fire, and bring them together to form this memory. And your consciousness is perceiving a refiring replay of something that's just really the neural pathways in your brain firing again, and your nervous system, your body feels it.
Yes.
Okay. So your consciousness right now is perceiving a memory. And
Yeah.
you can go to, a different memory, and your consciousness moves to something else, and your consciousness, pick something that's like a place you travel to. Boom,
Yes.
boom, and plays the movie, soundtrack, feeling in the body, emotion, people who were there, visuals, right? Food you
Yeah.
ate. You probably remember the food you ate.
Yeah.
Okay. Right? And you are re-experiencing it. Okay. As a feeling experience in your body. Triggered by
Yes.
the section, just triggered by the suggestion, hey, a place you traveled to and the food you ate there. Boom, boom, boom. Recreate
Bam.
the
I see
experience,
that.
feeling, seeing.
Walking in New York, music, even have the song New York. You know that?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's memory. And then if you start to say, oh, I was walking in New York and here was the music that was playing. Now you're telling a story about being there.
Now I'm using language, and that's when you see it as a story.
Yes, you're describing the experience of consciousness going into memory. You're explaining it, describing it, using language. Now it's a story. You're thinking
Okay.
about it, even if you don't tell me, you're thinking about, oh yeah, I was in New York, and when was that? And what was about then? And who was I with? And now you're
Okay.
telling a story
So now
about
I'm going for like pure imagery. I guess I think like is the right side of the brain kind of just imagery and feeling. To now kind of left side, like I have thoughts about it, and there's a story and description.
it. So now let's start to combine some things. You have an experience. You're bullied.
Uh,
Now you afterwards tell a story about it. Okay. This was unfair. This was terrible. He could have killed me. Okay. Or I
uh,
hate that guy. I'm going to kill that guy. I'm going to show him, I got to figure out a way to get back to him, or we say, I can't go to school tomorrow. I can't let that happen again. Now it's
and
looking
we
for a way. It's playing the memory, but now the story is about how do I avoid this in the future? How do I beat the guy, or how do I get away from the guy?
and we might have
Or
all of them. We probably will have all of them actually.
we probably will have all of them. Oh, all the other people saw me and they're going to know, and that's so
And
embarrassing, and I'm shamed. So we'll have anger, we'll have shame, we'll have fear,
here,
we'll have strategies to avoid it, strategy to beat him. So we tell, say, 5 different stories about it.
yes,
Okay.
and these are like reactionary stories to the memory.
Exactly. We had the memory, but now we have 5 different stories about the memory.
Like what it means, what to do about it,
What kind of person I
thoughts about
am.
it.
I'm weak. I'm a loser. I'm with, I'm embarrassment, shame.
Yes,
We, okay. Imagining people are judging me is the story, and that creates a new
another
memory.
story. That doesn't necessarily happen, but we imagine that might have happened or might happen.
We imagine it happening, and then here's the thing. Then we take this power that I talked about, this conviction. this ability to have a
Mm.
very rigid opinion. And we believe it did happen. People did really see me and are judging me and laughing at me. I am really weak. I really have to beat him up to go prove myself. I'm so angry. He hurt. I'm going to go do this to him and do that to him. I'm going to prove myself. I'm afraid of what other people think. All of this is now, because the memory is so much emotion strong, the conviction we tell these stories with is really strong. And it's
Mm.
really important to defend ourselves, figure out how not to go to school, how so it doesn't happen again. You
So
know,
you put
that
a lot of that conviction, will, faith in all of those stories.
our will, our conviction, our faiths, we have to do all these things. All of these things happen. All of these emotions were real. All of this is important, and I have to figure out how to avoid it tomorrow, because it's the mind is also anticipating, how do I avoid pain and painful, uncomfortable things. And so it's like, now it's thinking about tomorrow and what do I got to do to avoid it tomorrow and the next day and the next day, particularly if that's with repetition, right? And so all of these agendas of what I have to do are now in place, and they're very rigid because this was very painful and therefore very important. And therefore we're driven to
Hmm.
put our will into all these agendas. Okay. And
Yes.
now something else happens. Within all these agendas of anger is an idea of ourselves. I'm going to do this to him. I'm afraid of meeting him again. And we have an image of ourselves as
That's a different
afraid.
idea.
We have a shame and embarrassment version. Everybody saw us and I was weak and I can't show this is embarrassing. That's a version of ourselves. How do I escape and avoid this version of ourselves? So now not only do we have these, say, 5 agendas, we have 5 false personas of ourselves.
It's 5 self-beliefs, personas of ourselves, of who we are, with images and beliefs
With
based on all
images
these different stories.
and emotion and feelings and stories. And they are all fueled with this drive, say, for survival. This is
Yeah.
so important. We need to do this to survive. So all of that will
Yeah.
and conviction that might go into something that's as strong as opinion, this is much stronger. This is now what our mind says is our identity.
Yes.
And not only have we put will and faith into this as our identity, we are inside of it as consciousness, perceiving the story, the memory from the point of view of the victim. I'm afraid, the shame, I'm embarrassed, the anger, I'm angry, the I got to get away. We
So now this is like what I
have
am.
we had this conviction, this is what I am. So we have our consciousness in there and our conviction, our personal power in there. And now in
Mm.
this one event, our consciousness is divided into 5 different versions, and our will is invested in those 5 different versions of a false self. And so our will and consciousness now spread into 5, what I call characters or sub-personas from this memory.
So there's like 5 different I am X versions of ourselves instead of just I am, like consciousness is I am angry and gonna hurt him. I'm afraid to be hurt again. I want to avoid this. I am a shameful person. I feel ashamed and people are probably laughing at me.
Yes.
And we have our will goes into all of them and we move between them.
We are convinced that we are all of them in the version of the story, and our consciousness perceives that that's who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
because we make this agreement, this is who we are unconsciously, we believe the narrative, oh, I'm so angry. We can kind of hypnotize ourselves by the agreement to invest some will, some our personal power into that being our identity. And we trap part of our consciousness. You know, that cloud that I said is consciousness that we put anywhere? Part of that cloud goes inside that identity and now is trapped in there.
Yeah. So that has me thinking two thoughts
So hold on a sec.
that,
So we have, say we have the angry persona and it's like, so it's like, we say years later after being bullied, I'm a really angry person. What are we saying? We're saying that based on an identity where we infuse this sense of I am consciousness into this angry persona. And with our conviction of faith and power of will, we've like really made it a very solid, rigid persona, so much so that if we think about it, we go, oh yeah, that's what I am. And feels
yeah.
like us because part of our consciousness is still there. So it's easy to identify as this part and say, I'm an angry person, when we're not. No, we have a persona that acts out it sometimes.
And that persona we might have carried throughout the years, done things with, and we put more will and faith in that persona
Yes.
because we
Okay. So
have,
once it's formed, and we all form these, what's much easier next time for that angry persona to come out, act out, or whenever we're angry inside or something else happens, even if we never act out in anger for a long time, we have that anger bottled up inside. I'm like, oh boy, I'm an angry person inside and I better not let it out. And even every time we say that, we're kind of reinforming the narrative, I am an angry person, and we hypnotize ourselves, more faith into the idea that idea of ourselves as an angry person is what we are. So there's this hypnosis, and we're training this version of ourselves that then sits in the subconscious, and we go about our life. And now a moment, those things that we've just put into subconscious or automatic programs sometimes can come out very quickly, automatically with anger and surprise us. And then when it does, we tell the stories, oh, see, I'm an angry person.
yes, because
When
we
it's
put a lot of will in it and it just comes back like that.
right. And now if you take, say, events from childhood and you start building the repetition, because now that I'm an angry person or I've been angry, it's easy to be angry at other things because we've kind of established that persona. It's easy to get angry about other things because it's ready to be on automatic, right? It's automatically going to come out whenever somebody is threatening of us, somebody is intimidating us, or we don't like somebody. Our brain goes to, oh God, it was like that time I was afraid. And I'm afraid here, I'm going to be angry at this person because I don't want them, I need to push them away and make
It
myself
goes into that same learned response.
goes in that same learned response, reinforces, and now the neural pathways that are firing every time we do this, every time we tell a story, or every time we have an instance that triggers this, what happens? The neural pathway gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And we put more will and faith that that's a thing. We have more emotions, that's a thing. And we have more consciousness invested in that persona and less consciousness to sit outside and go, wow, that's a part. That's not me. That's just a part of me that has this agenda learned and has been repeating it for years. So to sit back in consciousness in the big cloud with lots of space is harder to do because more and more of our cloud of consciousness is now residing inside the persona, and the big cloud that could sit back and just perceive is getting smaller and smaller because more has gone into these sub-personas: anger, shame, fear, runaway, escape, judgment.
Yeah, that's the conditioned consciousness, right? And then there's the unconditioned. You see, more we do these patterns, more a lot of our consciousness becomes conditioned in that way.
Yes. Until, say, we're in adulthood, we've made so many agreements about our identity. We're doing so many things in automatic, and our consciousness has been distributed into these ideas of ourself. I'm an angry person. I'm not good enough. They're judging me. Okay, I've got to go prove myself. I got to make everything perfect. So invested in all these different versions of ourselves that we only really see as hinted at in the stories. They're thinking this about me, they'll probably do this to me, right? We reference I and me, but we're not really talking about I and me present moment. We're talking about all the different personas are having this conversation about each other's characters and themselves as characters, right? And we just spend a time reinforcing because we believe our thinking, that's really just the mind's thinking in the form of these personas. We end up believing their thinking, the mind's thinking, and keep reinvesting our faith, and this is where we're trapped.
Hmm.
And we could say a lot of these personas kind of make up the ego, and this is why it's difficult to see the ego, because we say, no, I am my mind. This is me. And we're not identified with consciousness. We're identified with the various
All those
characters we
ideas.
formed over years. Yeah.
Yeah, all that conditioned consciousness and ideas of ourselves. We think that's what I am. And it's funny.
And
Not
we are,
funny.
and so now if we take that big ball of awareness that if you see a baby, you have this sense of like, God, there's just this bubble of awareness. They're just sitting there perceiving everything, right?
Yes.
There's just like, they have this radiance of like, I just taking everything in, and that's what's gone into these different agreements. We call it agreements or beliefs about what we are from emotional experience. And so you take that big cloud, and now it's over years shrink down to hardly anything left is to sit and perceive and be present with. And it's all distributed into the mind, combined with will, generating stories that's who we are.
And will is really the power in it, because otherwise it's just ideas, but that light of the baby gets smaller over time because it puts so much will into those ideas that light is infused with those ideas.
Will and
And
faith.
that's, yes, will and faith.
It's will and faith. To me, they're two different kinds of energy, but yeah, they essentially are both forms of our personal power of make believe. And
Okay. So that's really when the light kind of gets smaller, when I imagine, is because you put all that energy into those agreements. Because otherwise it's just a thought. But when you put all that will and faith, now it has a lot of power in it.
yeah, because if I told you a thought has no power until we put faith in it. If I tell you they measured the earth and it's 23,450 miles around, like you're like, okay, and I'm like, oh no, Daniel, I read that wrong. It's 23,550 miles around.
How dare you?
You'd be like, well, most people are like, well, okay, throughout the 450 except the 550, because you have no emotional attachment. It's just information. That's a thought. You swap it out real easy. Some people like you a little more attached.
How dare you?
Oh, you feel
How
like I
dare
lied
you?
to
How
you.
dare you get it wrong? How dare you make a mistake?
Okay. What part of you feels offended that,
Okay.
So that's an idea. It's easy to swap out, but one you're attached to, you have invested faith in, is harder. One that you've invested consciousness in and faith as an identity is even harder because, well, the brain, the mind's, well, that's who I am. I can't let myself go. Who would I be? What would I be? I'd die.
You dream it. Like you think
Yeah.
you're that identity.
You think and believe you're that identity.
Yeah. Like this person will die if I stop being angry or afraid, or you
And
don't
in
see that
truth,
that's just the conditioning.
and in truth, it is in the conditioning, but in truth, in a sense, a part will die. But what happens is that consciousness that's identified with an angry person, well, that will come out. You're like, okay, I'm not that person. The idea, since it's no longer powered by faith and will come out. Consciousness comes out, and that idea no longer has power. And the neural pathways in the brain that used to fire automatically no longer fire in the same way. So they aren't as active. So there is kind of a mini death in a way, or a symbolic death of what is really the ego, or parts of the mind dying, fading. Anyways.
And then that faith and will also come back for you to
Yeah.
use
Yeah.
freely
So
in a new way.
while the persona identity says I will die, what actually happens is you as consciousness actually get stronger, because you get your will and your faith and your consciousness back. So you get more power, you get more consciousness, and you grow that great bubble of awareness again.
Mm.
And your will and your consciousness is not as divided every time you dissolve one of these false beliefs of your identity.
And then, right, you have more freedom and flexibility in how you respond, like, and think and act and feel.
Yeah,
And
exactly, your subpersonality characters are not doing automatic responses, and can't, because they don't have control over your will.
no, I'll share, like, when I started this work and I have a lot of trauma, like I would try to do these imagination kind of meditations. Like I would literally feel something blocking me from imagining freely. Like in my mind's imagination were like walls blocking me from actually imagining anything. So like my mind was so stuck at what it is used to perceiving.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time releasing, now I can go crazy with my imagination, and there's not a lot of these walls anymore. So it's
Well,
kind of like that.
crazy in a good way, with your imagination,
Crazy in a
wild
good
and
way.
fun and imaginative and
Fun.
playful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
good.
so it's kind of like taking myself as an example. It's kind of like I had all these identities and ideas and faith and will invested in them. So they blocked me from having flexibility to and how I want to dream and imagine and feel. And then when I let those go, I get that power back. I can now do it. There's none of that block, none of that imaginary walls in my mind.
That's very much how it works. A lot of times people start out, it's hard for them to imagine being happy, or getting there, or changing a job, or changing something in life. They just, it's a lot of times struggle for people to imagine things to be different, or they could be different, or
Very
sometimes to
much.
remember how it used to be happy. Because the mind is so rigid in its stories, holding attention and consciousness in, say, wounds and anger and hurt and shame and fear, that it's like, oh, that's like those personas, sub characters, think that that's reality, and then, oh, you ever being happy in your life was like, oh no, that's not reality. Like they
Yeah.
dismiss real other memories of being happy, and say, because they live in this bubble where
They have their own reality.
what they call reality, and I think we should just dispense with that word, because nobody knows what it means anyways.
Or we could
Okay.
say each of them have their own reality in that
Yeah.
way.
All right. So now we'll go one step further. Okay. So that's one event. Let's say being bullied. So we talk, and it's like, that's a strong event, lots of strong emotions, and where you end up with these personas, or what I call characters. So now, let's say you had multiple events in your life that were emotional, that were heartbreak, okay, or lost money, gambling, or uh, people criticizing, failed a class at school, whatever is the experiences. Each one sets up a chance for previous characters to activate and reinforce. Something's unfair, something's an injustice, I'm angry at them. or to create more layers of stories that then are like, oh, I can't be an angry person. I can't let that control me. And we repress emotions. If I feel that emotions, I don't know what will happen. I'll go crazy. I'm afraid. So we build up protective layers to repress those emotions and try and control these characters of emotion. We denial. We say, I can't let myself feel that. And so we start stacking these other layers of energy to compensate for these reactions so they don't come out automatically. And maybe we have 10 or 20 or 30 of these personas, characters, all in autopilot, doing what they're doing. Now imagine, so, and our consciousness and our will is deposited in each one. And you can kind of think of like balls sitting out in space. You know, they're held there by the rigidness of our faith that those are fixed and that's the way things are and they aren't going to change and this is who I am. And so we have these little identities we can run into their points of view waiting in the unconscious, right? They're held there by our will and faith. And our consciousness is distributed. The cloud's now fixed in these 30, 40 points, whatever it is. But now they don't live in isolation. They are in conflict with each other. They're supporting each other. They're networked. They're in tension with each other. It's like now we start connecting rubber bands from one to the other. The part that's ashamed and wants to run away says, no, we can't do that. Another judge says, no, we can't do that. That'll be embarrassing. What will people think? We got to go fight this guy. We got to prove ourselves. And so anytime we get a runaway strategy, avoid it. The other part says, no, I'm going to beat him up. I got to prove myself. I got to be good enough. I'll show them. That rubber band goes into tension between those 2 points. And now we feel tension. And so you start taking these individual personas that are these balls, and each one that wants to do something will then kind of affect another one that doesn't want to do it. Oh no, we don't want to change that. This will happen. And so now you start stretching rubber bands between 2 points and another 2 points, and each one gets stretched to 4 or 5 points around it because it's going to upset the status quo. So anytime you go to try and change a belief or idea of yourself, you're like, oh, these other things are activated, almost like they're pulling it back into place. Right? Like if we got rid of all our self-judgment, excuse me, if like we got rid of all self-judgment, but we only got rid of like feeling like a victim. Right? I'm not going to feel a victim. I'm not going to receive the judgment. The judge would go, yes, you are. That's your job to receive this. You've been receiving this for years, you know, and if you don't do that and you don't receive that, I won't have anything to do. So it needs a character to play the victim to our judge voice. Right? And if the
I want to invite
judge,
people like to imagine this as they like I'm imagining this.
stay with me, stay with me. And if we so the judge needs the victim character, and if we take the victim, we say, oh, excuse me, and we take away the judge, the victim will go, well, I need that judge back because it defines me. It reinforces that I'm here. It will, I need people to believe the narrative that that's what I am, or else I'll stop getting faith. I'll stop getting the conviction and will. My consciousness will then dissolve out of this. It'll cease to exist. So this is where the mind or ego is in self-preservation mode. Rubber bands spread between 30 or 40, sub-character personas, all in tension with each other, keeping the game going. And that's a normal mind, a typical mind, not normal in a way of a healthy mind, but normal in its typical common, this is what most people are living with. And when they go to try and meditate, they're challenged by it. When they try and change a habit, they're challenged by it. And they feel themselves in tension, difficult to change habits, and feel probably fragmented, not really knowing who they are, not feeling centered, because their consciousness is distributed, their will is divided into these false ideas of self. That to me is kind of the false belief system, and why I've spent so much of the work on belief systems. Like, that makes up the belief system of what we believe we are, which is completely false.
That then gets complicated.
It's might as well know where we're at. What's the lay of the land?
But fun. Kind of fun to reclaim it all back. It's fun.
Continue, continuing to live with it, it's not. But yeah, if you decide to reclaim it back, you're like, okay, let's go on an adventure. And this is the hero's journey that I spoke about in the podcast once. It's like we're going on a journey to reclaim our own will from all these false sense of self, our will, our power, our faith, dissolve these beliefs, return our consciousness to our present day present self, and really become whole again. And yeah, when you find a piece of, when you get over the hump of that fear of death or fear of loss of a part, and you really dissolve it anyways, and you can feel your power come back to you, and you feel more centered, and you have an expanded consciousness because your kind of central present consciousness cloud just got bigger. Yeah, it's a thrill.
It is a thrill. It feels like you're more whole again, like yourself.
Yeah.
That's why it's hard to make changes, right? Because you want to make a change, and you have all these different parts. If they're not, if you haven't worked with them, they're gonna pull you in the direction they want to pull you. And your whole will is divided between that. And especially if you have a lot of them, it's hard to move forward.
Very much so. And so this is where what you're up against is this basically a structure that's resisting you. Your belief system is resisting your own desire for change. And
Yes.
it's a belief system that we created. It's a structure that we made powerful. A lot of
Yes.
times people say, well, it's hard, it's big, it's powerful, and they feel overwhelmed. Like, well, how powerful are you? You created it. Like, so whatever you think it is, you're more than that.
Yeah. That's our will and faith in there.
If you can do, and this is one of my discoveries when I was like realizing how miserable I was and took some responsibility for it. I was like, I'm miserable, and this is me, and this is my mind doing this stuff. And I was like, oh wow. And I took responsibility, and I was like, ouch. But after I sat with responsibility for a while, I began to feel this like power. And I was like, well, this is strange. And then I realized, well, if I can create a mind that can do that unconsciously, not knowing what I was doing, then what could I do with consciously, intentfully do? Then that was like, okay, I got to try. So there's this, once you accept responsibility, this is my mind, this is my creation. And I did this in one of the energy trainings, like accept responsibility. You start to recover power. And then you're like, okay, then I can make another change.
As we invest so much power in there that we believe we're powerless or we don't feel it. But then as you kind of do the work, I think you reclaim your power back. Like it's like a snowball. It's like over time, the more you pop a lot of these bubbles or integrate a lot of these parts, you feel you have more power to make more changes and more changes. And you build I think you call it, like you build your personal power over time and you feel you have it more and more.
Absolutely. And and I'll just point out too, one more thing, I feel powerless. And if we change that to step outside, move into the big cloud and say, oh, there's a part that feels powerless. There's a part that
Or
says it is
believes it's powerless.
powerless. There's a part that believes it's powerless to change this. And if you step outside of that, now you have a chance to like not believe it. You're like, oh, that's a part. Is it true? No, not true. Is it
And you
telling a
actually
story?
feel power.
It's telling a story. Right. And you're moving into power when you move your consciousness out of the part that says it's powerless. So how many times have we done that? Thousands, tens of thousands. Believe what we think. That you have to like by repetition catch every little one. It's like, okay, now I feel powerful, like just even for that moment. And what are you doing? You're building new neural pathways. You're like seeing things differently. Your consciousness is moving bigger. And that powerless part just got a little weaker because you didn't put any more faith into it. You had a chance to make it bigger, and right there you just didn't let it get bigger. It might still be there, but at least it's not gotten bigger. And it's starting to
Yep.
lose your momentum. So every little bit matters. So
And like you feel different. I want to emphasize that it's not just like you change the way you think about it, but you literally feel different when you step out of it.
oh yeah. Yeah.
To me, that wasn't obvious in the past, but you feel where you have power suddenly. It's like magic.
Yeah. Well, you saw it with me yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I show up and I bring that power at different times, and it's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, power feels different. Agency and an extended expansion in awareness, consciousness feels different. Absolutely.
So you step out of the stories, you feel you have power, and then you feel you can make more changes. And that's fun.
And I think one of the the self-mastery course I put together was right to the core of this in a way. And the recapitulation series both are about seeing these structures of false characters, stepping outside of them, taking your faith out of the stories, getting your consciousness back to present self, getting your energy back that the will you've divided into all these places in the mind, and the consciousness that's divided, getting it back so your own consciousness and presence expands and your power expands.
Actually, I've been doing your work for many years, but I feel like I understood it more deeply now. You explain it this way. Maybe, Gary, I don't know if it would be helpful, but I could give some examples, even from my own life, of how that looks like. Because for me, when I listened to your podcast early on, I learned best from examples, and when you explain it, sometimes it seemed a bit like theory. And then I always wish, like, I wish you could have someone give some examples.
Fire away. Give me an example of how this works, how this fits.
I give two examples from my life. One I could give with just how hard it is, or harder it is. How would you phrase it? How it could be challenging to make a change when you have all these different parts um, grabbing you and different identities grabbing you to do what they want. Like for years I wanted to eat healthier, and now I do, but it took a while, and since I committed to doing it, because I would intend to eat healthier, and then I would have like so many parts of my mind resisting that with different reasons, like don't do it. Uh, coping mechanisms that are threatened now that I'm not going to use eating, or just my identity as somebody who has no self-control being threatened suddenly by me putting a boundaries on what I eat.
There was an identity, we call it character identity, persona, that was convinced it had no self-control. And so now if you were going to exercise this discipline,
Now I'm going to have
it
self-control.
was reactive. So now you have, so this is beautiful because this is how I'm going to exercise some discipline control. And now you see the rubber band of this, how this is connected to, oh, I don't have self-control, I'm weak, going, no, because this threatens it.
It's present.
It's threatened. Good.
And it's very hard, you know. It didn't have to be so hard. It's not really, but because I didn't really put an emphasis on it in my work, it was kind of a side thing that I wanted to do. Then it took me years to really integrate that. And because I think it would have been a lot faster if I decided, okay, I want to check out what's going on here. But it wasn't such a big thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
But over the years, just unloading, not even focusing on it, just doing the work, I found myself and still having that intention to eat healthy. I found over the years just less and less resistance until it was even unnoticeable to change. Just one day, I think I was at a wedding about a year back, the change really occurred. And I just, there's tons of foods, at wedding, and I feel full. And my usually go-to is if there's food and I feel full, I still eat if I haven't tried it. And I had just no impulse to eat anymore. And I was like, there's a little bit of resistance again of that identity of like, no, but you're somebody. It's literally like that. Like you're somebody who always eats, when there's food. Like, are you gonna be different now? And I caught it. And I was
Yeah,
like, yeah, I
but
want to
it's
be
like
different.
it's a much smaller voice, doesn't have
Much
as much
smaller by
pull,
then.
and you're more the observer of it going, huh, who are you talking to me like that? Yeah, that's a very, because your consciousness is bigger. And so the
It
voice
got bigger.
sounds and looks different and has less, and you have more power. So it has, well, less impact when it tries to pull you into it. So yeah, your relationship changes as you grow. Go ahead.
Exactly. Exactly. And so I was just like, well, I want to, it says like, no, but you're always somebody who does that. And I was like, well, I want to be different now. I want to be somebody who doesn't eat when he's full. And that was, and after that, I barely had any resistance anymore to that. And it's now naturally, I much listen to my body. It even feels gross to eat when I'm full, which is really like a change. I just don't feel like it. Because I had more will. And you probably don't remember this, but on my third session with you ever, I asked you about if you could help me with this habit of eating healthier. And you told me, no, not yet, because it's better when you have more personal power back. So we worked on something else. And so eventually I never actually got to working with you on it, but it got resolved over time as I had more personal power back. So correct the mundo.
Yeah, it's surprising the number of things when you go work on certain things that are in front of you, other things you want to change will just change. And you're like, oh yeah, I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Because
Sugar, just
because think about this. Let's say you have this one part that says, oh no, I don't have any discipline of will, right? And well, you recovered so much from, you know, process and cleaning all those agreements and beliefs and getting the energy and consciousness back. Will was stronger. So then you looked at this belief and it was like almost like you could look at it and go, well, I'm not that guy. Identity change, faith comes out, boom, dissolves very quickly, right? But now think about this. That identity, false identity, was connected by rubber bands to other characters, right? How many other things was it affecting in your life saying, oh no, you don't have the discipline to do that. You don't have the will to do that, right?
quite a few.
And now, so now when you dissolve that character, you start to dissolve, take away the rubber bands of 4 or 5 things it's connected to about meditation and listening and coaching and building your business and, you know, whatever you're doing, exercise and going to the gym and getting rid of the next thing in the food list and sugar, right? It's like it's now no longer sabotaging and speaking up when you go to change those other things, right? So all of those things that it's connected to have now gotten weaker because they aren't reinforced as much.
Yes.
So
It's
there's
much
this,
easier. There's freedom.
so as you dissolve one agreement, which is, or relationship with a band, or you take out one persona, then like the next one, it's easier. And you have more will and consciousness with to see it and to challenge it.
Yes. Yes. And it's funny, on the other side of rubber band, I had a super disciplined part that would know, was really like really strict about things. And then it was just a work on, and maybe I could use some more on it, like dissolving that and finding my way where it's like freedom. There's no rules. And it's
It
like I
was
choose
fanatical.
fanatical.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because actually before I I went into no discipline about eating, there was a period I was super disciplined about it. And I was like keto and no fun in it. You know, some people enjoy it and that's great for them, but like super disciplined.
Okay. Is there another example when to give about how these multiple personas are intertwined?
Yeah. Yeah, I could give, you know, my own trauma with sexual abuse. I could give. Like I know even last session with you, I had more clarity about this. Like there was this like almost like this one child, and then he's kind of feeling whole and integrated, and then he goes through an event or a series of events, and then he has suddenly to deal with those events because they're painful. I could see for myself like my own inner child kind of split off into so many different parts to manage it. And like one was denying that it ever happened, one was angry, one was sad, one was afraid, one was ashamed, one was denying the shame and denying the denial. And like to deal with that, my mind literally split off into so many different parts, fighting each other often, because then the anger fights the freeze response, and the fear response fights the anger, and the denial fights them all. And I could see how like this one child that feels like great split off into so many like fanatical parts to handle that event. And then just to give an example of then how that looks like after, that means that okay, yeah, okay, sexual abuse is over, but then like I'm 5'6" and I go through my life, then I'm much less present because literally I have a part that learned to dissociate from my feelings. So now I'm kind of a child that's daydreaming. And everybody would say like Daniel's daydreaming. You know, it's cool.
And
And
then
the same,
there's a kind of an embarrassment or a stigma about that you then
I
fight to
didn't
see
care
it
actually
into
about that one, but one might. I didn't care. I was like, yeah, I did. But other things, then I had another thing I developed after that, which I definitely could use some more work on, is competitiveness. So now, because my self-esteem was hurt in that event, now I need to prove myself, which I could feel beforehand. I felt no need to prove myself. So now I was like playing soccer with friends and super competitive, you know, with like trying to beat everybody. School, super competitive, trying to prove my self-worth because I deep down I felt like I don't have it.
Mhm.
Anxiety about the future, like I remember.
Well, let's and phrase it because language is critical. Deep down in a part felt like it didn't have it.
Yeah, well, I'm speaking
And
from
you
like
felt
how
that
my
part.
child self was
Right.
was
Okay.
feeling it as a
Okay.
child. He was, yeah. So as a child, like that's, I guess we could say I still have this had those parts as a child. So
Yeah.
one part of me was feeling like he has no self-worth. So another part was like I gotta be competitive and prove myself to people and be better. And then another part was afraid of not being better, you know, and felt bad every time somebody was better at me at something, anything, you know. And so
And
that's
this
how it affects here.
and this all stemmed out of layers of from one event, multiple parts that then add other reaction parts to react to it
Yeah,
that are
multiple parts and
trying to
identity.
manage emotions and fighting with each other.
Exactly. Exactly. Anxiety then, like learning to like again, I learned to like I had a part of me that learned to be anxious about the future. So
And here's one of the challenges is when we kind of look at what's going on in our mind, we tend to look, well, with our mind, we look with an analytical part, we look with the viewpoint of the judge and go, well, that's wrong, that's bad, that shouldn't be doing that. Those emotions are overreacting, right? So we look, a character is looking at it, and our consciousness is inside, typically the judge pointing out all the things are wrong or bad. And now we're not really seeing the mind, or we're not with consciousness and going, oh, okay, this is happening. We're adding stories. This is wrong. This is bad. Shouldn't be this way. That's an overreaction. You got to make up for it here.
yeah, it's also
Right?
learned.
So all of those stories are coming from a part, reinforcing other parts. So the stepping out, that's a challenge, but necessary to kind of look and see with no narratives, no opinions about what's there. This is when change starts to really have a chance to really happen. Like, I got to step out and see it without judging it. And
So big.
yeah,
You have to see it with compassion for it to heal. Like you have to see
yeah,
it with compassion.
yeah. And this is what you created to deal with that trauma is extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's brilliant to manage that emotion, that painful memory, and to wrap it all up and hide it so that you could go on and function during a day. And you were doing that at very young age. You're like, okay, I'm going to manage all this pain that we'll struggle with when it shows up later as an adult to do. It's like, it figured out a way. That's amazing and very typical. And the way it does it is to separate all sorts of things out into parts and narratives, and then more parts and narratives. And so that's why this is a typical mind. And by
Yeah.
typical, I don't mean healthy, but it's the
And
mind
it's
we all end up with to some degree or another, and that it's our responsibility to help heal.
yes. And let's put
No,
that out there. You end up with that even if you didn't have like what's people think of like a big T trauma. You still end up with that in different forms.
I have clients who didn't have big trauma, still have stories of not good enough and overachiever and narratives because they still had emotional experiences and made agreements, and their will was just as strong in those agreements,
Exactly.
to build false ideas of themselves. So nobody gets through to adulthood with a whole consciousness and a whole mind. It's a divided mind, divided consciousness, and a divided will.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen.
That's the awesome journey. Then if you were claiming that.
And this is what all us humans are working our way through.
It's an awesome journey working that way back.
Hero's journey. Hero's journey. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to share about today. So that it's like people know it's like, oh, that's what's happening. This is my mind. When I watch it, it sure looks like it's crazy. It's jumping around all over the place. One part's reacting to another part. And I feel like I'm all of them. And you're like the pinball bouncing between all those different points and being stretched by a rubber bands in 30 different directions in tension. And if you go move one piece, that's going to upset everything. So we got to keep so that the structure says we got to keep it in place, and yet we know something's wrong about it. And to move things around feels fearful to the structure of the belief system and its personas. And yet, that's what needs to be done in order to recover your power, your will, and your consciousness and be whole again. Whether you like it or not. That's pretty much the situation we're in as humans. And whether you like it or not is kind of just a version of a part that tells a story. Oh, I don't like it. Shouldn't be this way. This is unfair. It's like, great, you got a part that's telling a story about this situation. It's also not true and is probably a victim in, or judge in some story of injustice. Great, that part's there. Please step outside of that as well and go, it is what it is. Start moving through the steps. Or stay there as long as you like, because here's the thing about human beings. They will suffer as long as they decide to. You know? And they'll change and do the work when they decide to.
You got ruthless Gary on. I like it. True.
Don't make me laugh. Well, what did I say?
No, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Well, let's say once you decide to, it's not you're gonna be happy straight away, but then you can go on a journey to be happy and it's possible. Or you don't decide to and then you're stuck.
You can go on the pathway to happiness. You can go halfway to happiness. You can stay
Halfway
stuck
to
where you are. You know, there's various processes to do this.
Well, it's an awesome journey. Thank you, Gary. One of the best. It's a great one. I learned a lot.
This session?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for the extra time getting my ideas organized. I hope that's clear enough. Yeah. Yeah, a peek to what's happening in the unconscious. Because most all of this characters, parts, they're happening outside or below our level of conscious awareness. So what does that mean? They're unconscious automatic programs interfering with our eating habits, our exercise routines, this procrastination, meditation, anger. You know, it's all run by these belief systems that we've extended our faith into unknowingly. And you know, when I started teaching this work and putting a process through together for people, what I what I came to is like, oh, no matter the person's issue, people were coming to me as coaching clients in the beginning. And I was like, well, no matter the person's issues, we need to cover these basic things. It's like, and if you have these skills of like, okay, move into being an observer. You're outside these points of false characters. You're observer of them, and you're controlling your attention. And now you can apply some skepticism of doubt to the stories that are there. Like these structures, characters start losing power, you start gaining power, growing in consciousness, and the change happens. And so this was a self-mastery course. Like, do these exercises. You're going to move into observer perspective, right? You're going to see how the stories are made up and they're not true. You're going to see the different characters doing what they do, and you're going to not believe them when you practice these things, and the power will come. You'll start to have more and more power, more and more consciousness, and they will have less and less. So, and it didn't matter the issue somebody was having, whether it was self-judgment or perfectionism or fear or jealousy. It was like the skill set they needed to dissolve this was the same and get their power back and grow their consciousness. It was the same. So that's
Take
how
that.
it became the self-mastery course. I was giving the same lessons and practices to each of my coaching clients. At this point, I got bored. I'm like, I'm going to put this online and make recordings because I'm tired of repeating the same thing each time. I know it's going to work. I know this person needs this. Now they need this lesson. Okay, they do this for a couple of weeks. Now they do this for a couple of weeks, and then they'll get this one, and then this next one will click, and that'll fall into place. It's like, so that's how that self-mastery course got created. To train a person to be the observer and control their attention and strengthen their will and their consciousness. All right. You want to close out the show?
How do you usually close it?
This
You
has
can get
been,
that warmed down. Oh, I got you.
Go ahead.
This has been wait,
You can't say you're Gary Van Warmerdam though.
I'm Daniel Moore. Okay. Or you're Gary Van Warmerdam. This has been the Awareness and Consciousness podcast about consciousness, will, and the mind, and how we have these wounds and our mind splits off and how we heal them. And you're Gary Van Warmerdam from pathwaytohappiness.com.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you found it helpful. Thank you,
Thank
Daniel
you.
Moore.
Thank you, sir.